Naegleria Fowleri kills more than 97 out of every 100 people it infects, one of the highest fatality rates of any infection known to medicine. It lives in warm, fresh water, in lakes, hot springs, and slow-flowing rivers, and it does not need a cut or a wound to get inside a person. Warm water pushed up into the nose is enough. From there it climbs the olfactory nerve, the same pathway that carries the sense of smell, straight into the brain. Only water forced up into the nasal passages can carry it that far. Swallowing contaminated water poses no risk at all. Since 1962, only 4 of more than 150 documented patients in the United States have survived. Once symptoms begin, the median time from first headache to death is about 5 days. Some of the most striking cases never involved a lake at all. In Louisiana, and again in Texas, people rinsing their sinuses at home with tap water instead of distilled water, using neti pots or water stored in a recreational vehicle, carried the amoeba along its one working route into the brain. Its range is shifting too. Confirmed infections have crept northward into states like Minnesota and Kansas as water temperatures climb. Creature far too small to see with the naked eye, following one narrow path into the body, has one of the highest kill rates medicines has ever recorded. Plasmodium Falciparum, or malaria, is the deadliest parasite in human history, responsible for over 500,000 deaths a year through the 2010s, most of them children under 5. A single mosquito bite delivers it into the bloodstream, where it heads for the liver before turning red blood cells into breeding chambers. Inside the blood, infected cells are made sticky, clumping together until they clog the smallest vessels in the brain, the mechanism behind cerebral malaria, the disease's deadliest complication. The parasite has been shaping human biology for a long time. Its lineage split away from the malaria parasites of gorillas long ago, though exactly when it became a fully human disease is still being pieced together. The parasite's own DNA has even been recovered from human teeth in Roman-era burials. Millions of years of that pressure have left a mark in our genes. Sickle cell trait evolved specifically as protection against it, cutting the risk of death by malaria as much as tenfold, even though 2 copies of the same gene cause sickle cell disease itself. A widely repeated claim holds that malaria killed half of every human who ever lived. Statisticians who have gone back through the numbers put the true toll far lower, though still catastrophic. This single-celled organism, smaller than a red blood cell, has shaped human genetics, killed more people across history than almost anything else alive, and still takes hundreds of thousands of young lives every year. Toxoplasma Gondii can only complete its sex life inside the gut of a cat. Every other animal it infects, humans included, is just a way station on the way to that one host, a temporary body to survive in and, if possible, to help get eaten by a cat. It usually reaches a person through undercooked meat, through contact with an infected cat's litter, or from a mother to an unborn child during pregnancy. In an infected rat or mouse, the effect is easier to see. The animal loses its instinctive fear of the smell of cat urine, and in some cases seems drawn to it instead, wandering toward the very predator built to eat it. It once seemed like a precise trick aimed only at fear of cats specifically. Brain mapping studies later found infected mice growing fearless of predators in general, not cats alone, which reshaped how the manipulation is understood. Roughly a third of people alive today are estimated to carry this single-celled parasite in a dormant chronic form, usually without ever knowing it. Several studies have found latent infection statistically linked to a higher risk of traffic accidents, in some cases more than double, though whether the parasite is truly the cause is still an open question. A parasite that only wants a cat's intestine has, along the way, taken up long-term residence inside roughly 1 in 3 people on the planet. Taenia Solium, or pork tapeworm, is responsible for up to 30% of all epilepsy cases in some regions, caused by its cysts growing directly inside the brain, a condition doctors call neurocysticercosis, and by some counts, the single leading preventable cause of epilepsy worldwide. Eating cyst-infected pork gives a person an ordinary intestinal tapeworm, nothing more. The dangerous brain form comes from swallowing the tapeworm's eggs instead, usually spread through poor hygiene from an infected person rather than from meat itself. Once eggs are swallowed, larvae travel through the bloodstream and settle in the brain, forming cysts that can remain in place for years with no symptoms at all, before finally triggering seizures. The damage can outlast the parasite itself. Seizures can continue for the rest of a person's life, even after the cysts inside the brain have died and calcified into scar tissue. Between roughly 2.5 and 8 million people worldwide are estimated to be carrying these brain cysts right now, and the parasite has turned up far outside its usual range, showing up in tests among refugees resettling in the United States from countries including Burma, Laos, and Burundi. A worm whose eggs are invisible to the naked eye is, in some parts of the world, behind nearly 1 epilepsy diagnosis in 3. Guinea worm can grow up to a meter long inside a human body, then spend weeks slowly emerging through a burning blister in the skin, usually on the leg. That burning pain is intense enough that victims instinctively plunge the affected limb into water for relief. This single reflex is exactly what completes the parasite's life cycle. Contact with water triggers the worm to release its larvae, which are swallowed by tiny water fleas and picked up again by the next person who drinks from the same source. The whole cycle stayed a mystery until 1870, when a Russian naturalist traced the emerging larvae back to those microscopic crustaceans in drinking water. Understanding that cycle made the parasite unusually easy to defeat, simply by filtering drinking water and isolating infected patients. Cases have fallen from 3.5 million a year in 1986 to just 10 in all of last year, a decline of more than 99.99%. It is on track to become only the second human disease ever eradicated after smallpox, and the first ever wiped out without a vaccine or a medicine. A worm, once responsible for millions of cases a year, has, within a single generation, been pushed to the edge of extinction, all without a single drug or vaccine. Onchocerca Volvulus, or river blindness. Worms spend up to 15 years coiled inside nodules under a person's skin, growing, in that time, into adult females half a meter long. The parasite spreads through the bite of black flies that breed in fast-flowing rivers, which is where the disease gets its name. Once inside a person, the adult worms settle under the skin, while their offspring migrate through tissue, including the eyes, causing intense itching, skin changes, and over time, permanent damage to sight. Around 18 million people are infected worldwide, and roughly 270,000 have already gone permanently blind because of it, making it one of the leading infectious causes of blindness on the planet. Treating it is not simply a matter of killing the worm quickly. Mass treatment campaigns have to run for 10 to 15 straight years, long enough to outlast the natural lifespan of the adult worms already coiled in a patient's skin. The disease reached the Americas centuries ago, carried across the ocean during the era of the transatlantic slave trade. Colombia has since become the first country in the world certified free of it, a rare case of a disease's history being fully reversed. A worm that can live coiled under the skin for 15 years has cost hundreds of thousands of people their sight, one slow infection at a time. Angiostrongylus Cantonensis, or rat lungworm, invades the human brain and grows there, even though it can never complete its life cycle inside a person, and it usually dies only after triggering severe, sometimes fatal, swelling of the brain and its lining, a condition doctors call eosinophilic meningitis. Its natural hosts are rats and the slugs and snails that rats eat, and in some places, nearly every slug tested carries it. In one study of an invasive slug population on the island of Hawaii, the parasite turned up in the large majority of animals sampled. People are usually infected completely by accident, by eating unwashed lettuce or vegetables with a tiny slug or its trail hidden among the leaves. Symptoms often include a severe headache and a stiff neck. As larvae migrate through the body, some people also feel strange tingling or burning sensations under the skin. A small number of documented cases came from something far more deliberate: someone swallowing a raw slug on a dare. Rat lungworm was first confirmed as a cause of human brain infection through autopsies in Hawaii around 1959 to 1961, decades before most doctors elsewhere had even heard of it, and it has since spread well beyond the Pacific. A parasite that can never truly live in a human body still finds its way into one again and again, through nothing more than an unwashed leaf. Trypanosoma Brucei, or sleeping sickness. This parasite carries a genetic wardrobe of roughly 2,000 different disguise genes, and it periodically swaps its entire outer coat of 10 million surface molecules for one the immune system has never encountered before. It spreads through the bite of the tsetse fly across parts of sub-Saharan Africa. And the parasite even reshapes the insect that carries it. Inside the fly, it alters the saliva, making it worse at stopping blood from clotting, which forces the fly to bite more people more often just to get a full meal, spreading itself further with every failed attempt. The disease unfolds in 2 stages, an early phase in the blood and lymph, then a second phase once the parasite crosses into the brain and spinal cord. At that point, it is thought to disrupt the body's internal clock, the likely mechanism behind the disease's namesake, the reversal of normal sleep and waking. Left untreated at that stage, the disease is almost always fatal. Decades of surveillance and treatment have pushed the annual case count down to under 1,000 worldwide, a dramatic fall from a disease that once drove major regional epidemics across the continent. A single-celled organism with something close to 2,000 disguises, capable of swapping 10 million molecules on its own surface, still moves through the body largely undetected until the damage is already done. Wuchereria Bancrofti, or elephantiasis, infects more than 120 million people worldwide, and nearly 40 million of them are left permanently disfigured or disabled by it. Adult worms live inside a person's lymph vessels for up to 8 years, producing millions of offspring the entire time, and gradually blocking the vessels that normally drain fluid from the body's tissue. That blockage is what eventually causes the disease's hallmark swelling, most often in the legs, arms, or genitals, sometimes severe enough to reshape a limb entirely. The worm's offspring stay almost invisible in the blood during the day, then flood into circulation for a few hours around midnight, timed precisely to when the mosquito that spreads them is most active. This single species is responsible for around 90% of all cases of the disease worldwide, spread mosquito bite by mosquito bite across the tropics, especially in South Asia and parts of Africa. Lymphatic filariasis, the illness it causes, was the first mosquito-borne disease ever definitively linked to mosquito transmission, a discovery made over a century ago that helped shape the entire field of tropical medicine as it is practiced today. A worm that can time its own offspring to a mosquito's nightly schedule has, over the decades, permanently disfigured or disabled tens of millions of people around the world. Trichinella spiralis, or trichinosis, settles inside a single human muscle cell and rebuilds it from the inside, forcing it to grow up to 100 nuclei and turning it into a custom-built life support pod that no longer works as a muscle cell at all. Around that hijacked cell, the worm triggers the growth of entirely new blood vessels, wiring in a private blood supply so it can feed and get rid of waste for years inside a living person. It favors the body's most metabolically active muscles, including the diaphragm, the muscle responsible for breathing itself, which is why severe cases can bring on fever, muscle pain, and swelling around the eyes as the larvae spread through the body. Thorough cooking, or deep freezing, reliably kills the larvae hiding inside the meat, and so do a handful of carefully validated curing protocols. A few days of ordinary salting or fermenting often leaves them alive. In the United States today, decades of regulation have made commercial pork far safer, and most modern cases now come instead from undercooked wild game, like bear or wild boar, taken home and cooked without that same oversight. A worm that turns a single muscle cell into its own private life support system has, in the end, only ever needed one hijacked cell to keep itself fed for years. 10 different organisms, some barely visible, some invisible without a microscope, and each one has found its own precise way into the human body. Most can be avoided. A few, once they take hold, simply cannot be stopped.